Hi, Michael.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
And I'm going to hang up the phone
Hi.
on the screen, okay?
Yep. That's
Hello, hello.
fine. I'll just be on.
You're on the screen. I think we have everyone. Yep.
We do.
All's
Well,
good.
mostly have everyone. Penn, I'm not sure if they're going to get there. We're trying to sort
You're
out.
still working on Penn?
Yeah, I mean, you can at least hear her. I'm not sure if we'll get her video to work, but
It's fine. Hi, Michael.
oops.
Don't leave me. Come back on the screen.
It's 4:00. We need to get started, folks.
Yep.
Absolutely. We are here at the Keystone Progress Summit, and this is the Poor People's Campaign discussion. My name is Paige Bingham, and I'll be your moderator, I guess, your host for the panel as well. As you can see, we have Penn Garvin and Michael Pollock with us. Penn Garvin is a really good friend of mine, and we've been talking politics and stuff for the longest time. Penn is a longtime community activist who has worked in the field of organizational development and mediation. She started back in the beginning in 1968 when she was a part of the original Poor People's Campaign. And she is I'm trying to read here. She has trained people in civil disobedience and participated in many of social movements, campaigns, including the civil rights, women's health rights, human rights in Latin America, environmental, and to eliminate criminal climate justice. She is now currently a facilitator for the Hub for Progress, and focuses on engaging new activists and the skills needed to talk with persuadables, those who can be persuaded, including conservatives about progressives issues, and she can be reached at pengarvin@gmail.com. We got through Penn's. She will tell you more about that. And we also have Michael Pollock. He grew up in Rockville, Maryland during his years as a rabbinical school in Philadelphia. He co-founded March on Harrisburg, a group dedicated to making corruption illegal and taking our democracy where it is never been before by passing anti-corruption, pro-democracy bills in Pennsylvania. March on Harrisburg lobbies, marches, and does nonviolent civil disobedience to move their bills and build a government of and by and for the people. Michael hobbies include convincing politicians to not be corrupt, and long marches through the Pennsylvania countryside and setting down in convenient places in the state capital. So those are my two guests for today. We will be talking about the Poor People's Campaign and their involvement in all of that. But I come to you as a financial educator. I am a member of the Keystone Progress Board. I have been for about 7 years. My passion is financial literacy. I don't know if you all got a chance to be a part of Erica Payne's the first kickoff session this morning, but I got really excited talking about how millionaires are asking to be taxed more in order to equalize the economy. So what I want to do first in presenting this Poor People campaign is give you a picture about how, and not even how many, but just what it's like to be poor. And I'm sure there are some who can identify with me, to the fact that you would need to get governmental assistance, which at many times is a shameful thing to admit, that you needed to get food stamps or you need to have a subsidized income. But that's just the way it is in our country right now, because people are not earning the kind of money that they need to earn a livable wage. And then again, there's no systematic way of educating people on how to manage their money. So that's the point where I step in as a financial educator and show individuals the simple process or the simple steps they need to take in consideration by learning these principles. And one of those is the compounding interest, the difference between compound interest and simple interest. Then you have the rule of 72. I mean, we've all heard that before, but we've never applied it when it comes to how do we manage our money as far as borrowing money versus saving money, and which one of those interest rates is more advantageous to you. And then there's the time value of money. But first, I want to start with a poll. If Laura, if you have that poll, and we can put that poll up, those who are here can participate in that poll, and it takes about 3 minutes to answer 5 questions. And what this is, this gauges how many people can answer 5 questions, basic financial questions, correctly. And most people cannot answer more than 3 correctly. I see that we have about 9 people, if I'm reading my thing correctly, on here. So we don't have a big crowd to really boost that statistics, but I'm really curious as to how we fare with that poll.
Give me a second, Paige. I have to enter them manually in, so just chat for a minute.
Okay, so while she's entering those polls, we'll have Penn, if you could just start out a little bit and just fill in the holes from your introduction that I read off here a little while ago.
Yes, it's nice to be with you all. It's nice to be with Erniezer and with Michael and with Carmina. I wanted to just talk a little bit about the 1968 Poor People's Campaign for 2 reasons. One is because it informs us a lot about what we are doing presently with the Poor People's Campaign and what is happening now. And it also was very personally a very important part of my political development as I was a young person. I was on college campus. I had always been in favor of justice and had been aware of poverty. But when Dr. King started the Poor People's Campaign as a change from what he had been focused on, he had always been focused before on civil rights, and then it really expanded his view to include the idea that people in this country need to come together. All people who are poor and are not of the elite need to come together, because only together are we going to push our country to go in the correct direction that needs to be able, that everyone is able to live decent lives. And the Poor People's Campaign was born of that. Right after the start of the Poor People's Campaign, some of us did some lobbying because we wanted to go to Washington, D.C. before the Poor People's Campaign arrived, Resurrection City that was being built on the mall in downtown Washington. We wanted to go before and lobby our Congress people. When Dr. King was assassinated was a time in my life when I had to do a retreat and make a decision if I was going to continue in my life, the plans that I'd made, or if I wanted to work for social justice. And that's when I really made a pivot to really dedicating my life to working for social justice. And I have never regretted it 1 minute. And the Poor People's Campaign was the first of my real involvement, both with lobbying our Congress people. And I have to say, it was very disappointing to find out that most of the Congress people had no idea about what was happening with the Poor People's Campaign. And then working in the communications office of the Poor People's Campaign, where I got to meet a lot of the SCLC, Southern Poverty, the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Council staff that had been really very, their whole lives had been turned around because of the assassination of Dr. King, but they continued and kept moving forward and did not stop the Poor People's Campaign. It was a very moving and very visual, because people were parked on, there was a Resurrection City was right on the mall. And it was the first time in our country that people had come together as poor people and as people who had always been marginalized in one way or another to work together towards what we believed in. So it was a very momentous time. And I think that this is something that we accept more now. We are more able to see that kind of working together. But in the day in 1968, it was very different. The present day Poor People's Campaign is a continuation of this very important way of looking at organizing. You start with those who are marginalized, who are least able to speak for themselves, and you pull them together with the idea that when we all come together and we all push for what we need together, that's when we can get what we need and want in this country. And the present day Poor People's Campaign is doing that really very well. Now, I know that you wanted to put up something, Ebenezer, but I was going to pass it on at this point to Michael, but I don't know what you want to do at this point. I can speak a little bit more, or just stop and let you put up the survey, or pass it on to Michael.
And that's okay. We're going to be relaxed in this because of technology and what we need to do, and it's all going to come together. I just wanted Michael, now, if you would, just fill in the gaps from your bio that I read, and give people a better idea of who you are and what your work is, because we can get into the weeds a little bit later.
Sure. So, my name, I'm Michael Pollack. I'm in Philadelphia, and actually, let me turn the camera on here so that we can. Hello.
Thank you.
I'm one of the tri-chairs of the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign, and with March on Harrisburg as well. A lot of the work that I do is some faith-based organizing within the PPC, working with the faith leaders team and trying to organize within congregations, which get clergy more active and develop leaders within faith settings to further the work. And then within March on Harrisburg, I do a whole lot of, I also do a lot of logistics stuff within the PPC. And then within March on Harrisburg, my work is a lot of the legislative side of things, interacting with Harrisburg, lobbying. I am technically a registered lobbyist, although I'm definitely the worst paid registered lobbyist in Pennsylvania. And a lot of organizing, a lot of coordinating events, and just growing the movement. And so the work has a lot of facets to it. It's all fascinating stuff. Should I kind of dive into what the campaign is up to, or what March on Harrisburg does? Or I'm kind of happy to take this in any direction here. There's always fascinating stuff happening on every front.
It is fascinating, and as it was said before, it's sexy, if I could use that, because the passion that is behind this whole movement is to raise the awareness of the conditions that people have to live with. What are some of the platforms that we're talking about money. That's the first thing that is part of this discussion is money, power, and politics. How does money play into what you're doing right now? How does that hinder you or help you, or what do you need?
With March on Harrisburg, we focus a lot on money and politics and how money affects our government and how it affects the decisions that we collectively make that govern us. And the answer, the short summary of the situation is that money dominates our political system. To run for office costs money. To raise that money, you have to go to people who have money, and people who have money have a similar set of interests, and they ensure that the candidates they fund agree with them enough to keep them comfortable. Then you have, once you get into office, you're just assaulted with money. You have lobbyists coming at you in Pennsylvania with unlimited gifts. That includes Super Bowl tickets, that includes trips to the Bahamas, endless steak dinners. You're just there's this tidal wave of cash coming at you at all times in all different forms. Then, you also have the dark money problem, where you have money that there's no transparency at all behind, and that can show up at any point in any form. It tends to show up 3 days before somebody's election in the form of a very expensive and slick mailer that goes out that slanders somebody and tanks them in the election. There's money money dominates the system. I mean, that's the system that we live in. And so our goal as March on Harrisburg is to get money out of politics. And right now that means the gift ban bill. That's what we're primarily focusing on at the moment. We've been pushing it for.
On the what now? I didn't hear you. On the gift?
The gift ban, trying to make it illegal to give unlimited gifts to legislators. So right now in Pennsylvania, it's completely legal. And I know this sounds very absurd, but it is completely legal to give anything to any legislator. And that takes the form of cars, vacations, cash, all of the above. It adds up to about $1.5 million a year in gifts going from lobbyists to legislators. And that's a significant undercount. We know the number's way higher than what's reported. The reporting is basically meaningless. And so we're trying to pass the gift ban to make that illegal. And we've had some success, and there's still a long way to go within the building to move it forward.
Yes, dark money in politics definitely puts poor people at a disadvantage. And that is what we need to do we need to equalize the playing field, and getting poor people mobilized, I believe, and involved in the political process. Penn, please tell us more about your teaching on civil disobedience.
Well, let's see.
Or nonviolence.
Yeah, let's see where to start. There are many ways of pushing your government to do the kinds of things that it needs to do. One is lobbying. So going and actually talking to Congress people or your representatives on any level is one of the ways of doing that. However, that is only only go so far usually, because often the congressperson may have a different viewpoint from you, and they're only going to move as far as they feel they have to move. So, but lobbying is important. That's part of our democracy, and it's important to let people know. Lobbying can also take the form of petitions. It can take the form of letter writing. There are many different ways in that way to speak out. There's also ways to start building people, rather than looking at your representative, to build a base of people that is educated to the issues and knows how to really not only understands the issues, but how to work to make that voice very loud and clear in our country. That's a lot what the original Poor People's Campaign and this present day Poor People's Campaign is about. And that is that taking the people who usually don't have a voice, who are not the people who are going to go lobby. They're not going to go and take buses or drive their cars down to Washington, D.C. and make appointments, etc., with their Congress people. They're not people who are going to do that. They're the people who live the problem every day. They're the experts of knowing what it's like to live in this country without health care, without good housing, without decent jobs, and all the things that the Poor People's Campaign is fighting for. Those voices need to be lifted up. And that is a different approach. That's not so much a lobbying approach as a building of a social movement of educated people who include everybody who can have a voice at the table to talk about what it feels like to live under certain situations and to be able to speak to that. And the Poor People's Campaign, the present day one, is excellent at doing that. It really brings together people who have been marginalized because they've been incarcerated, or people who are marginalized because they're homeless, or people who are marginalized because they don't have the education, or people, any way that people are marginalized and have not been listened to listen to their voices. And that is, in my opinion, one of the main focuses of the Poor People's Campaign. Sometimes lifting up those voices, and I am getting to your question there, Neezer, sometimes lifting up those voices is really important to do in a way that brings out the contradictions in what is being said is being done and what is really being done. And those contradictions are something that we often don't have to look at. It makes people uncomfortable. Our newspapers don't cover it. But civil disobedience, and there are many types of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience really means that you are willing to break a law, a minor law, not hurting anybody, it's nonviolent, a minor law, in order to help show what this injustice is that is not being looked at. So one of the ways that people have done civil disobedience in the past is and actually the original Resurrection City was in a way a civil disobedient action, because it created housing and people living in the mall, on the grounds of the mall, right down in Washington, D.C. And people were not willing to just leave because they were an eyesore. They didn't want the people to be down in the mall because it didn't look good for Washington, D.C. And they said, this is part of your country. It doesn't look good, maybe, but this is the reality of what's going on. So they were really doing civil disobedience on a large scale in the original Poor People's Campaign. So civil disobedience means that you are willing to show up what people do not generally want to see. People got arrested during the civil rights movement. There are people getting arrested nowadays for climate issues. There are people who are willing to risk arrest. I always say that it is an important tool. It's important to know how to lobby, and it's important to know how to do civil disobedience. And it's a tool that we use when it's necessary to be used. And there are trainings. We are going to be doing trainings this June around climate issues, nonviolent direct action, civil disobedient trainings. There are trainings you can take to learn how to do direct action, civil disobedience. And it's an important tool for anyone who really cares about issues in this country and who wants to make a change. So did I answer your question there, Neezer? I hope.
You most certainly did, Pen, and then some, because my mind is just racing right now with all of the examples that you gave on how our poor people are marginalized. You know, those who were incarcerated, those who have felony convictions, those who are uneducated, you know, whether it's literal literacy or just financial literacy. So my hope is that we can marry the two. Rich people want to be taxed more. And the efforts for people who don't have money to play their part in making those phone calls, writing those letters, talking with their neighbors about the issues. Where do they go for this information? You know, have these conversations around these issues. to promote action, to cause them to take action. You can take that, Michael.
So, poorpeoplescampaign.org, please sign up through there. And the structure of the Poor People's Campaign here in Pennsylvania is that it's made up of its member organizations. So there's many fronts of struggle. There's, healthcare, there's climate change, there's mass incarceration, there's democracy and corruption. There's many different fights to be fighting. And so the Poor People's Campaign in Pennsylvania is a group of those groups that are fighting those various fights. So people who join the Poor People's Campaign tend to join one of those member organizations. March on Harrisburg is the one that I'm with. Put People First, is a great statewide healthcare movement. CADB, the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, ACT UP, MILPA. There's couple dozen groups that are members of the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign. And so the best way to plug in to the PAPPC is to plug in through one of the member organizations or directly into one of our working groups. So if anybody's interested in plugging in, just let me know. And I'll find the right organization for you or the right working group for you. We're a working campaign, so we don't really have membership roles or anything like that. It's just kind of whoever's doing the work and whatever organization or working group that they're in is part of the campaign. And it's definitely not it's not limited to. We don't see the campaign as something where you have to have experienced some sort of life tragedy to participate in. It's a class struggle, to put it frankly. And if you're somebody who works for wages more than you rely on capital investments and returns for your income, the Poor People's Campaign is probably right for you. Meaning that if you're somebody who's not part of the ruling class, then this is the campaign for you. And so that means people who consider themselves middle class or upper middle class even, and even people who are part of the ruling class who are of good conscience and want to destroy it. Are absolutely part of the campaign and welcome in. We're a very big tent. We believe in moral fusion organizing. We organize across every line of division. All of our member organizations are committed to not limiting our organizing by geography, to urban areas or rural areas or suburban, or limiting it to political affiliations or race or gender or religion or any of those traditional fault lines. We organize across all of them. And that's essential in building a movement that's powerful enough to take what we need to live. You only win what you're organized to take, and that's the history of humanity. So we're really, working on building that movement that is moral fusion, broad-based, constantly growing, constantly having conversations like this where we can come together in solidarity. I bet you if I took a poll of this room, everybody here knows somebody or loves somebody who, has struggled with debt, whether it's student or medical debt, or has an underfunded school in their area, or has potholes in the road, or, faces bleak wages and a bleak economic future. It's the same story that's happening in every part of this state and frankly, every part of the country, which is just this kind of general malaise and exhaustion at getting kicked in the face with a boot for so long, that we're building around that feeling of momentum that's taking us toward a third reconstruction, or we can undo the militarism in our society and undo the war economy and end systemic racism and end ecological devastation and end poverty, and weaving through all of that, change the horribly distorted moral narrative of our society, the one that tells us if you're poor, it's your fault. We like to say being poor is not a sin, poverty is a sin. Being homeless is not a sin, the existence of homelessness is a sin. We're trying to really bust that moral narrative that keeps us quiet, keeps us siloed, keeps us hating our neighbor and not realizing that we're being robbed from above.
And I'd like to add one more thing to that Michael hasn't mentioned, and that is, and sometimes people look down on this, but it's really very, very important. And when you're doing the work, you know how important it is. If you can do a monthly donation to the Poor People's Campaign in Pennsylvania, that is really needed, because to do any of this work, we have to have money to do that. And it's very hard to be raising money and doing all the other work. So that is a very worthwhile way to contribute. You didn't mention that, Michael, but I wanted to make that clear to people.
Thank you. Yeah, always please donate to March on Harrisburg, donate to the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah, that was one of the questions. I guess it wasn't plain enough of what it takes as far as money to run this Poor People's Campaign. When the people that you're trying to reach are poor and are not able to contribute financially to this massive movement. And how do you scale this? How do you scale this massive movement for the state of Pennsylvania? What pockets do you have?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So first, we have to begin with the understanding that we're never going to have more money than what we're up against, and not even close, not even by a long shot. That's just a fact. Bridgewater Capital has more money than the Poor People's Campaign ever has. The movements in movement spaces will never be able to even compete with what a single hedge fund can control. So we have to understand that the bosses have the money. That's their power. That's their asset. That's the idol that they clutch very closely to the chest and use to control, to maintain the system. But it definitely takes some money to organize, and it takes some money to build a movement, and it takes some money to pay the staff that's necessary to do this. But again, we are very volunteer driven. So in Pennsylvania, there are no paid staffers, no paid organizers with the Poor People's Campaign. At the national level, there is a sizable team. There's several dozen people on staff who are full-time. Every once in a while, for special occasions, they'll kind of rent a staffer to the state. So actually, right now in Pennsylvania, we have somebody doing outreach for a 5-month contract leading up to June 18th, 2022. And a lot of other states also have one or two people that national is paying for. But that's temporary. At the state-based level, there's no funding. At the national level, their funding comes from several sources, a lot of small dollar donors. Thank you, Penn, for making the fundraising pitch. You can definitely go to poorpeoplescampaign.org and donate. That's a lot of the sustaining money. There's some foundation money mixed in. Then there's just a couple rogue members of the ruling class, members who have realized it's time to do away with this. And they definitely provide some solid support. But yeah, the money, it's not there. It's never going to be there. Which I know sounds bleak. We just need enough to keep the lights on, and the volunteer hours are what drives the whole thing. That's the only way this works.
So how do you go ahead, Penn?
I was going to say, one of the other things that is important to understand is how the Poor People's Campaign has been organized, which is it has a national directing group, but that each state then brings, as Michael talked about in Pennsylvania, the different groups that came, about 24 different groups that came together in Pennsylvania. Each state has their own group of people who've been working for the rights in one way or another of all the people that have been talking about being part of the Poor People's Campaign, that come together. And I think, is that true that there are about 40 some, not every state, but about 40 some states have a local, i.e. statewide Poor People's Campaign that is running, that's really focused on the needs of that state, which are going to be different state to state.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're active now in, I think it's 46 states. There's coordinating committees that are active and doing good things. The sentiment in most states, it rhymes. It's different here and there, in the border states, for example, immigration is a much bigger issue, although it's a huge issue here in Pennsylvania too, the rights of immigrants. But there are themes that kind of go throughout the country. And then the on the ground needs definitely vary, and it's in funny ways sometimes. I mean, I remember being on a call with the Alaska folks, and they were talking through their challenges and pulling off a direct action at their capital, and they were talking about how they need boats or planes to get to their capital, which is not something that we have to think about in Pennsylvania when we're organizing caravans to Harrisburg. But yeah, we're a national organization, and a lot of the leaders in the various states are professional organizers in one way or another, but a lot of them also aren't. Here in Pennsylvania, two of our three tri-chairs, two of the three people leading the campaign here in the state, organizing is not their full-time work. One is adjunct professor at Penn State, and the other one is does other kind of more nonprofit work. But so it is volunteer driven. That's really the main point. That's the heart of it, because that's the movement that we need. And even people who don't have money, have a lot of power. Have ways to contribute and drive the movement. I mean, that's where the power base of the movement is it's people who others might write off as, there's one leader out in Washington State who calls herself the white trash that they forgot to burn. And so she definitely doesn't have any spare money or time. But, if coal miners working 16-hour days can take on the National Guard, we can do this. Yeah.
And I'd like to say one more thing connected to that, if I might, Earniezer, and that is that
Yes.
as an organizer, we are always looking for ways to make sure that the different issue groups don't get siloed in their own issues. And that is one of the things that I looked at the Poor People's Campaign from the very beginning. The issue has been across many, many potential silos to just talk about poverty and to talk about what is needed in terms of poverty and racism and changing the moral stance of this country. So I look at the Poor People's Campaign and see that they're not dealing with siloed issues. They're dealing with blending all these issues together, which is really important, because when we come together, as is happening in the Poor People's Campaign, we start to understand how our issues are so similar, first of all, and there's no hierarchy of one is more important than the other. And so I think that it's a real, it's the Poor People's Campaign is helping to build the movement out of this kind of siloed way that we have had the movement in the United States for so long. And I really honor that about the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything affects everything. Everything is connected. And if we lift from the bottom, everybody comes on up together. That is definitely the moral fusion approach of the PPC, and it's so crucial for highlighting it. If you look back in U.S. history, the times when movements win is when we come together across lines of division and fight for common interests. If you study the way the ruling class operates, it's very clear that they don't silo their issues at all. Reverend Barber likes to say, if the bosses are cynical enough to come together, then we have to be smart enough to come together.
Yes, we have to come together. There was a lot of information, and I was trying to make questions, but to synthesize all of this. How do you? And I know you want to build a mass production. How many people do you have in a march at any given time? Would you say?
We can get several hundred to Harrisburg on a rainy weekday. And for DC, we're talking hundreds of thousands for June 18th. That's the plan. We're responsible for 30,000 Pennsylvanians heading on down. So if all 11 people here could, sign up right away,
Right.
But we're getting there. We're going to get there. We're fairly confident. Because people are hungry. People are really hungry for this type of thing. It's not a hard pitch to say, the revolution's on. People are really ready to go. And we tap into the current that runs through the body politic that's tired of artificial suffering, of needless suffering on so many fronts, of just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, of problems with very obvious solutions, that work for everybody, that we just continue to ignore in a system that's just incapable of responding to the most basic needs of people. We're tapping into that human rights attitude that everybody has a right to live, and people are hungry for this and desperate for this. And so the real challenge, frankly, it's keeping up with the organizing. I mean, it's the internal organizational scaling up growth. That's the hardest part of the whole movement, in my opinion.
Right, scaling up growth, and what I wanted to point out too is that I run into a lot of people who are poor, who need to have this momentum, are afraid they're going to lose whatever financial resources that they do have if they stand out and they speak out against it. And then we go back to those who just do not know the gravity of where we are in this whole unjust, unequal economic system. We have like 11 people on. You say, if everyone goes out and get 5 or 6 people to join them on a call discussing this, maybe we can get some movement going. Let me ask this.
Yeah.
What are some of your victories? You can answer whatever you were about to say, but what are some of your victories that you are most proud of at this point?
Yeah. So first, I'll just say, the challenge is leadership development. It's developing leaders fast enough, people who are, clear in what we're doing, as you just spoke to, clear in the world, in the reality that we live in, who are competent to carry out tactics, who are competent to do the actual work of organizing, who are connected with other people in their area, with other institutions, organizations, and people who are committed, people who are coming in this for the long haul, because these are long fights. Humanity's been trying a really long time to learn how to live with itself without killing itself, and to be able to live together with the beauty of the world, made manifest. And it's a long challenge, and sometimes we're better and sometimes we're worse, but it's a long fight, and it's on every generation to keep it moving forward. And I'm sorry, the question you asked, I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
What is the victories?
Oh, the victories. Yes.
The big hurdles that you've overcome, and what's next?
Yeah. So wins. Oh God, I can't even speak to. There's just so many that happen across the country within the campaign. At the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. There's some success here and there. Federal level wins are much harder to come by because Congress is pretty damn broken and captured by moneyed interests. We've been able to break through at the federal level a few times. Have congressional hearings, that kind of thing. Have all the presidential candidates show up at the PPC forum and speak to our issues, although their word isn't really worth much during campaign season. But I don't think we've been able to move any solid federal bills, into law that we can really particularly take great credit for. We've been able to influence conversations and get things like the child tax credit more prominent into national debates. At the state level,
child tax credit.
That was something that we pushed pretty hard into. I think every package that they float. We push a lot of things at every opportunity at the federal level. Right. Sometimes something sticks for other reasons. But where the movement isn't strong enough to win at the federal level the way we need to win. It's not even close. That's just the honest assessment of where we are as in terms of movement strength. And I'm not just talking about the Poor People's Campaign. I'm talking about the movement world, across the country. The state of organized labor, the state of progressive organizations, the state of independent parties and other independent institutions. It's not even close to being able to win for the people at the federal level. We're very far from that. There's a lot of organizing that needs to happen to get there. At state and local levels, winning is easier. And we do have power to get wins. In New York, they've banned fracking and done all sorts of great environmental things. A lot of our groups were involved with that. In Pennsylvania, wins are also pretty tough here. This is a very corrupt, relative to other states, very corrupt state that we have. We've been able to, launch gift ban bills out of committees. We've been able to, MILPA's been able to get their driver's license bill moving for undocumented immigrants to be able to drive without fear of deportation. CADB has had a lot of wins on the mass incarceration front. There's just always campaigns that are happening on every front. Some of our environmental folks just won a big court case and got out of jail, which was a net positive for them. There's just so much happening, so many campaigns all across the board.
One of the things.
I'm sorry, I should mention something that might be of interest. In March on Harrisburg, we won vote by mail in Pennsylvania in 2019. That was a big win. So.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest, and this it's not in the category of this bill or that or whatever was passed, but I think one of the biggest wins that is going on in the Poor People's Campaign is to show people that they matter and that coming together and working together, that they can do something and support each other. That is an amazing win. And I know that doesn't seem like the same thing as a bill being passed or whatever, but one of the ways that the powers that be keep us divided is to make us think that it's impossible to do anything. And the Poor People's Campaign is really showing that we are coming together, and that when we do come together, people start to feel that they matter, they can have agency in what they do, that they can learn some skills to be able to move forward and build a movement. That's a long time thing. It's not a short thing, but it's changing that mindset is, I think, really critical. And I think that's one of in my book, that's one of the major things the Poor People's Campaign does. When I've spent time with people and talk with people who were not involved before the Poor People's Campaign, before it all started, the new one started, and were not involved and now are involved, that's what they talk about, that they feel totally different than they don't feel alone. They don't feel that they're wrong. They don't feel put down. They don't feel that they don't have a voice, that they are learning, and they're learning skills to continue that.
100%. And Penn, we are so totally, completely still in that leadership development phase. Yeah. And as part of that leadership development and movement building, you wage short-term and intermediate campaigns. Not long, big campaigns. We're not going, for example, in the democracy front. We want to abolish the U.S. Senate. It's an anti-democratic institution. That needs to happen at some point, or at least seriously change the way the Senate is made up, because it's not one person, one vote. And that's a U.S. constitutional amendment, and that's a gigantic fight. If we were to pick that fight right now, it's just not happening, because we don't have a movement to back that type of fight up. But fighting for a gift ban in Pennsylvania, that the movement can take that and use that to continue to build the movement, so that we can continue to build the fight and keep winning, until we build the world that we want to live in, the democracy of, by, for the people, with guaranteed human rights.
It's like a stairwell. You take one step at a time. And I like that idea of building it from the bottom up. And once you do that, all ships, rising tides raise all ships. One of the things I wanted to ask was, oh boy, and go ahead, Penn. You wanted to say something until my question comes back to me?
Yeah, go ahead and break in when it does. But I think one of the things that we are all so geared towards fighting against things, because there's so much that we need to change and fighting against. But we also need to be envisioning the world we want to live in. And I think that the Poor People's Campaign, bringing everybody together and giving people support to be their own agents and do their own work and speak for themselves. That's part of the envisioning of a new world where people do speak for themselves. And that's a big piece of the Poor People's Campaign, is really living out the vision of what we want to see. And that's very difficult to do in the midst of everything that is not the way we want it to be. To live out that vision is very important. And I think the Poor People's Campaign does that really well.
I'm seeing that it does, and it will build, especially as we get the word out. I have a question in the chat asking about the gift money, and if there are any legislators who have verbally denounced taking gifts. Do you have legislators who say no gifts, I can't be bought, or?
Well, they would all say I can't be bought. That's not the truth, though. The human mind
They all
tells
say
itself.
that.
Yeah, I mean, that's corruption is very arrogant, and corruption tells itself a story every day to get through the day, and it's not I'm corrupt, but so none of them would ever say that they can be bought. But yeah, they sure talk about how much their colleagues can get bought. It's always the guy down the hall. But so anyway, there are some legislators who do not take gifts. There are some who have called self-imposed gift bans over their office. There are not many. One's coming to mind that's formal, and there's a few informal ones. So most of the legislators are open to this. That crosses party lines. That's frankly an irrelevant factor in corruption issues and money and politics issues. It's bipartisan through and through. And so the gifts, they and we've met with everybody in the building many times over, and vast majority of legislators say that they are pro gift ban, that they want to pass the gift ban. That hasn't happened yet. The way Harrisburg works, the way our state legislature works, is that there's a small amount of people who control what gets called up for a vote and what doesn't. And so if those 6 people don't want something to move, then they can block it. Doesn't matter what the other 247 legislators want to happen. There's a lot of concentrated power in our legislature. It's not a democratic system internally at all. And so even though a vast majority of legislators want to pass a gift ban, the governor is ready to sign it into law. It's been bottlenecked again. There have been 33 gift ban bills introduced in the last 20 years. Only 2 have gotten out of committee. One was in 2019. We were able to launch it out of committee, and then it didn't get a House floor vote. And then in this past fall in October, we passed the gift ban out of the House State Government Committee again, and now we're trying to get it a floor vote. And if you go to giftban.org, there's some information there about who to call and yell at over this. And then please do call them and ask them. Ask the House Majority Leader. Yeah, just ask him why is bribery legal? Why is this okay? And he has nothing to say to it. This is an issue that there's really no response that politicians give that's satisfying to the public, because there's just no defense of bribery.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. I see Carmina Taylor is still on the call. Carmina, come on and ask questions or share with us whatever information you might have on the Poor People's Campaign, or your idea of what the Poor People's Campaign was about. Carmina, are you there? Maybe she stepped away. But just to recap where we are, what we covered is that we need to get the dark money out of politics, and this is how we build power in the middle to lower class for economic sector of our communities, is to get dark money out of the politics. I don't think we mentioned voting, but I think, Michael, you said one vote, one person, one vote, and that's not the way it happens in the Senate, but we need to increase that number in the boots on the ground and the people people on the ground and who are affected by the economic injustice in our country. And we just need people to just get involved and get off the couch and partner with Poor People's Campaign or the 24 other groups that are affiliated with them and lend a hand. You know, I know having wages, taking time off from work, it may not, or in most cases will not be feasible, but there are letter writing campaigns. There are phone banking campaigns to call your representative and ask them about these specific bills and why aren't they passing in the House or in the Senate. I see Carmina is back.
I'm sorry, I was juggling. I know you asked me a question. I'm prepared to answer if you'd like.
Well, I just wanted to get your take from the African American community, because we work, the subtitle of this is Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. I wanted to, in the last few minutes, because the other information was just so powerful and so much needed. We all know the history of this country when it comes to the marginalization of Black and Brown people, when it comes to income and wages and good jobs. What is your take on this whole Poor People's Campaign in light of the marginalization of Black and Brown people?
So one of the things that I think is extraordinary in Pennsylvania that I have found, I am from the Southeast region and I've been traveling all around rural PA. I think there's a hidden poverty level that no one's paying attention to. When I looked at the school districts in rural PA that are 97% white, the poverty rate is 30 to 50%. But when you add Black and Brown to that, the poverty rate starts at 50% and goes to 90%. These Black and Brown students are also in the achievement gap disparity. And so their families qualify for free lunch. So there's a rippling effect of not having the proper adequate access to equitable resources to thrive and not being able to maintain a livelihood. And I think the thing that gets me is that, you know, we focus so much on urban and suburban areas, but there's a hidden poverty strife in rural PA amongst people of color that fit that category. And so I think that I love NIJME and I love the Poor People's Campaign. And I think that we have to realize that Greene County, the poor people in Greene County are the same poor people in Pennsylvania. When the COVID crisis hit the schools, both counties in the Southwest and the Southeast did not have access to Wi-Fi for the most part, or didn't have laptops. So I really would like to have a conversation about how poverty is existing in all those spaces, and especially with Black and Brown people, and what we need to do to rise them up. I see you got 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Excellent input on the whole racial wealth gap. I did want to mention that George Bush put out the No Child Left Behind Act, and that act had in it a provision for financial literacy in the schools for the children and their parents. And there's only 3 states in the country that has financial education in order to graduate from school. One of those is Utah. So, Michael, if you came back on, is there something you wanted to add in our last couple of minutes, and then we'll circle back around to Penn?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, you know, that we're active across all geographical lines of division. So, you know, in rural areas and suburban areas and in urban areas, and it really is, it's the same story everywhere. It's the same story wherever you go. It's my kid's school sucks. There's no funding. There's potholes on the road. My healthcare is too expensive, and I can't afford to use it if I even have it. I'm worried about the poisoned air, land, water. You know, poisoned indoor areas too. You know, it's this. My internet sucks. It's too expensive. There's only one company to choose from. I have a dead-end job. The wages aren't going up. They've stagnated. It's the same story every single place in Pennsylvania and across the country because we're all living under the same basic system here. In the Poor People's Campaign, we whenever we talk about race, we talk about class, and whenever we talk about class, we talk about race because you can't pick apart. There's every single statistic, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's health outcomes, whether it's literacy, whether it's economic situation, whether it's people locked up in jail. It's the same story across the board, which is raw number, white people are the highest. If you just look at the raw number, quantity, highest number of white people. If you look at percentage, black and brown are the highest 1 and 2, and then white is far behind that. And because we live in a system that has to disproportionately oppress people and turn them against their neighbors in order to sustain the ongoing looting that is our system. And so if you can convince your white neighbor to hate your brown neighbor in order to send their factory overseas and take their job, that's what you do to keep it going. If you can turn to go back to the original slave codes several hundred years ago, if you can turn the white indentured servants against the black slaves, you can make both their lives miserable. You just make one group a little more miserable than the other, and you sit happy in the plantation house and keep the money rolling in. So we have to organize across every line of division. We're all suffering under a similar system with disproportionate outcomes, and the sooner we can come together and get in step, the sooner we can dismantle it and build something beautiful.
We are 1 minute over. Pam, do you have final words?
The only thing I would say is if you're an individual, find out how you can get involved with the Poor People's Campaign. And if you are an organization, team up with the Poor People's Campaign. You will learn a lot, and it's an important way to really start building our movements together. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ebenezer. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you, Carmina and Michael.
Thank you, Michael. And I thank you, Carmina, and all of you who are listening. I really appreciate that. Maybe next time we'll get to that survey and I will be able to show you some tricks on how to increase your financial resources, but this was not today.
You know what I'm thinking?
Ebenezer,
we should do that poll on our social media accounts.
Yes, let's do that. We do that poll on the social media account.
And we'll get a lot more response.
Did we stop recording yet? Because Mike, can we stop for a second? Are we
I
done?
can't stop the recording. It'll just stop when the session ends. So
when did it? Okay, so Mike, I'm in Philly. We should connect. I'm doing a Civic Saturday tour, and I divided the regions by the lowest per capita. And, Forest County is where I'm starting with a 14,000 per capita, and Philadelphia is where I'm ending, and it has a 21,000 per capita. And Towanda, Bradford County, and Mifflintown, Juniata County are in between. So I'd like to talk to you and Nejmi about that.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's just, people don't realize how destitute it is.
My God, just last week I was out in Juniata Terrace, and it's an old company town, and it's just kind of wild to be in like a literal old company town that's just been repurposed into, just dilapidated housing. But just to see like the identical nature of every house, and it's just wild to just be
So Juniata Terrace isn't Juniata County?
It's attached to Lewistown. It's
that's
across the river from Lewistown. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you.
We organize out there. You gotta.
I love it. Connections happening. This is what this is all about.
Yes, I love it.
I love it.
Thank you. Laura, I'm going to turn
everybody.
it over to you so you can let us know what's going on.
So we're
So now we go back to reception.
so everybody, you can, if you're, we've got a couple more panels yet today in the U.S. Senate Forum. So if you go back to reception, the little house icon on your left, and then you can then find another session to go into and go join that, and hopefully check out the rest of the day. And we have a whole another full day tomorrow. So we'll see you in other sessions. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Laura. Thanks
You're
for getting
welcome.
me on.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.